Okay, so this is the time when most flocks are at their most vulnerable. The trailer's just pulled up with some sheep from market. They could have come from anywhere. You might even know where they've actually come from, but what you don't know is what those sheep might be carrying by way of disease. So this piece is really about the importance of bringing them home, getting the trailer backed up to some concrete into the yard and putting those sheep effectively into quarantine on the yard for at least 48 hours and then away from the rest of the flock for certainly 3 or 4 weeks, much longer if you can possibly manage it. So we've got our sheep home, they're on the concrete. We're going to keep them in here for 24 to 48 hours so that the treatments we're going to give them have time to work and we've got time to clear out those worms we're trying to get rid of. And the first thing to remember is that we're not doing this so that we can clear those animals out from worms for their benefit. What we're trying to do is to make sure they don't bring any worms that are resistant to anthelmintics onto our farm. And that's really important because although to quite a few of the white drenches, now most people have got some resistance, there are still quite a few farms who don't have resistance to other groups. So it's really important at this stage you don't import somebody else's problem. And there's no way that by looking at them you're going to know. So we just have to take these steps to make sure we don't bring anthelmintic resistance onto the farm. Now to do that, what we need to do obviously is to use products, the most recent products that we don't have any resistance to in the UK, and that means that we can kill all of the worms, all of the ones that are resistant to the other groups of anthelmintics that we would use on a more regular basis. So we've got two options here. Both of them are the most recent ones on the market and both are only available through the vet. The first one is the group, the orange group, the 4AD group, which is basically only the one product, Monopantel. That's been on the market now since 2010 and at the moment we don't have any known resistance to this product in the UK. Likewise to the slightly more recent, been on the market now for 3 years, Group 5, what we call the purple drench, and this one is actually, if you notice, has got two groups on it. This is a dual action product, but would do the same job in terms of taking out those resistant worms. So really important that we do that and we get those dose rates right as soon as the animals arrive, before they have chance to get out on any of your pasture while they're in the yard. Now the other thing from a parasite point of view that we've got to be really conscious of is sheep scab. Sheep scab is pretty well endemic in the UK now. These sheep, they may have come from a market, they may have come from somebody you know, but they can pick up sheep scab in transport. You've no way of knowing whether or not they're harbouring sheep scab mites. So again, you're at your most vulnerable at this point. You need to treat them and make sure that you don't bring that problem in. The options there are that one of the things we would like to do to just make sure that this worming has worked really well is to add a second wormer into the mix. So if we're to use one of the injectable wormers which also covers sheep scab, then we'll be able to nail both things at once, and that is the preferable action for a lot of people. And out of preference from a resistance point of view, then a moxidectin product would be the one of choice for the sheep scab. But equally there may be reasons why you might not want to do that. For example, the 1% moxidectin product is contraindicated with foot vax, and you mustn't use that with animals that have been foot vaxed, and you might not know whether these animals have had foot vax or not. So choose your product carefully, but if you're going to use an injectable, and do it according to the instructions really carefully. If it says subcutaneous, do that properly. If you use the intramuscular one, then you must do that properly as well. If you wanted to, there is no reason why your scab treatment shouldn't be an OP dip, an organophosphate dip. Not many people have access to that now. Some people would prefer not to use OP dips, but that is a legitimate option and would of course cover other things like lice as well, that the injectables won't do. So we've treated our sheep, they're on the concrete, and we've got them in the yard for 24 to 48 hours, and after that we want to keep them isolated from the rest of the flock for as long as possible. 3 to 4 weeks minimum, because obviously there are other things, foot rot for example, CLA, all sorts of conditions which we might want to make sure we haven't got before they come into contact with the rest of the flock. But from the point of view of worms and worm resistance, we've treated them with these products to try and get rid of all the anthelmintic resistant worms, but we now need to just make sure, be very careful that we don't cause ourselves a problem by turning them out onto clean pasture. Now, intuitively people would think, well, we've spent all that money on them, we've given them lots of treatment, surely we want to turn them out onto a field without any worms. But remember, we didn't do it for their benefit, we did it for the flock as a whole. We didn't want them to bring in any of these nasty red worms which were resistant. But just in case there is still something there and they are still carrying the odd little 1 or 2 worms that are resistant, that escape treatment, we need to make sure that we take that sheep that might just be carrying the odd worm and we introduce it into a pasture that's got our worms on it, so that that worm gets mixed up with everything else, and any damage that it might do is bred out because we've effectively diluted it on a dirty pasture. So that's why after quarantine, just in case, we say make sure they go out onto your wormy pasture that you've had sheep on, so that anything that might just be left is diluted out and does a minimum amount of damage.